Hey everyone, and welcome back to Empty Pockets Ironworks. Join us today as we create a knife out of a railroad spike. This is a very fun entry-level beginner blacksmith project, one that I'm sure that you're going to enjoy. For today's project, any old rail spike will do. This one's got a good tip. It does have a little bit of mill scale on it, but I wasn't too concerned with it. Didn't feel the need to clean it up beforehand. Now you'll notice here when I pull it out for the first heat, it's at a nice medium orange. And I'm going to strike with the 2.5 pound hammer. Now I am going to say here you can see my hammering technique where I'm actually reaching above my head, trying to keep my elbow and shoulder as straight as possible. Trial and error, I have learned that this is actually, for me, the best technique, and it keeps from tearing up my shoulder. I start at the tip of the rail spike and work my way back. I use the top of the anvil, which is approximately 3.5–4 inches wide, as a base for the starting point of my blade. I know that from that point it will leave me enough area in the tang for my hand to fit. If you're a bigger guy or a smaller guy, you probably should measure accordingly, and I would suggest making some sort of a scribe in the rail spike itself so that you. Now here you can see my Fisker 4-pound hammer. I picked this up at our local Walmart. I believe it was around $25, and I absolutely love this hammer. You can see how it's moving my anvil stand. It's got a lot of power behind it. And of course, again, I'm using the same hammering technique, reaching above my head, allowing the hammer to do the work. I'm just basically letting it fall. And to keep from tearing my hand up, I'm actually pretty much turning loose of the hammer on the way down. And there you can see the front of it. I've actually dressed it out. And it's still awfully flat. But for moving a lot of material relatively quick without the use of a power hammer, this is my power hammer. And for $25, you can't beat this hammer. I've seen other reviews online and on YouTube as well, and everybody seems to be pretty pleased with it. So your local hardware store, Walmart, anybody that carries Fisker products, if you're a blacksmith in the market for a 4-pound hammer, check this one out. Not only is it a vertical peen, which is nice, but so far it's treated me very well. It's been a very good hammer. Now here you can see we switch back to the 2.5 pound hammer. After using the 4-pound hammer, I've got my material pretty well flattened out and drawn out to the point that I can start shaping the blade. The 2.5 pound hammer, you can see here I'm striking at an angle to give the belly of the blade a little bit more shape. I'm also kind of pre-surfacing my grind edge. You can see here I've actually shaped the blade into a pretty usable knife shape and edge, and here I'm hitting it on the spine of the knife to kind of flatten it back out and give myself a little bit better shape. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these are hoof nipper tongs that I've modified. I just welded some plate to them and took a little bit out of the jaws to allow them to fit on the rail spike. They work, they're not great. I'll modify them later. After being in the forge for about 4 or 5 minutes, I actually run my propane forge at a little bit lower, around 14 or 15 psi, and it's single burner now. It was 2 burner, but most of the stuff that I do, I don't need more than 1 burner. Rail spikes are tough. As you can see here, this is a 12-inch pair of, well, 12-inch crescent wrench, and I'm still having a pretty difficult time twisting this rail spike around. And as you've seen, it was yellow hot to begin with, and it's still bright orange now. Everybody online that I've seen in different forums and knife maker forums, they tend to trash the ideal of using a rail spike as a knife, at least as a functional knife, because they say it's a mild steel, or it may have properties of hardened steel. I've even heard it called a medium steel. I'm not a metallurgist. I really don't know. I can tell you, though, that, of course, the head, the striking portion of it, on a spark test, does look like fireworks, so it is hard. The bottom of it, of course, is not hard. It bends. But the material itself, the metal itself, seems to, at least in most of the rail spikes knives that I've done, they hold a decent edge. Now, I'm not saying you can go out and hack through brush and survive with this knife in the wilderness, and I hope that you don't have to. But for general purpose and something that's cool, maybe a gift or just a novelty item, they hold a decent enough edge. Now, after the twist here, you can see I'm smacking it on the anvil. Sometimes I'll use a board if I don't want to mess up the twist itself. But in this case, I went ahead and flattened that out. To me, it's a little bit softer on the hand. And here you can see I'm using the horn of the anvil. I'm going to put a bow in the handle itself. Trial and error, of course, with everything. I've found that this shape in particular, and I don't know that I finish it here, but you'll see it in the next few frames, it just fits the hand really well. And of course, after you shape it, it gives it a nice overall feel. So now we're back over to my weld table, and I've locked the knife into the vise, and you can't see it, but there's actually a chalk line here as a guide that I've drawn out on the blade for one of the basic shapes. Usually I don't know, especially with the rail spike knives, I sometimes try to plan it out, but usually I don't know what shape I'm actually going to go with, and I just kind of let it take shape about midway through hammering, and then correct the course as needed. And then oftentimes, just like with this, I'll trim it down at the end to make it a little bit more appealing to myself. So bottom line, with these rail spike knives, they're fun. I don't sell them for an astronomical amount. Usually it shows when they're done. I usually sell them for around $25. They take about 3 or 4 hours, so they're not a real profitable item. But for practice and for gathering attention to your booth, these are a really nice item. Now here I'm going to use the cutoff wheel on the grinder, and I'm going to create a small notch, and then I'm going to round that out with a chainsaw file. And it's just a single cut chainsaw file, so you'll see I'll only go one direction with it. I absolutely despise seeing somebody use a single cut file and rake it back and forth. It just makes my teeth hurt. But anyway, I just do this until it meets about halfway through the file, and then I stop. And that just kind of becomes my reference point as far as sharpening and shaping the blade. As I mentioned earlier, this has got a really nice shape and really nice feel to it. Fits really, really well in the hand. There you can see there your fingers and your thumb just kind of naturally fall into place. Now this is preheated canola oil, and I'm up to about 1700 degrees. I went in nice and straight, flat and quick with the for the quench, and then instead of washing it back and forth, I'm actually going front to back, and then I'll start making kind of a back and forth pattern, as you can see there. Reason for this is I've actually had a lot of knife blades warp on me when I immediately go into the quenching medium, whether it be water or oil, and immediately start going back and forth with it. And it seems like 9 times out of 10 the blade will warp, and of course then you have to renormalize. So here we are in the house. Make sure you have permission from the missus. We're going to bake our knife at 400 degrees for an hour and 10 minutes. The reason for the 10 minutes is that allows heat up time, because I'm not going to stand around and wait on the oven. I'm going to go ahead and throw it in there. And then after that, it's back out to the shop. This here is pretty self-explanatory. It's just a belt sander. For this particular application, I start out with an 80 grit to really hog off a lot of material. And of course the blade was pretty close to begin with, so I didn't have to use very much of it. And you can see how sharp, or not sharp, but you can see how hard the knife is there. You can see a few sparks coming off, and they're short and straight, and then they pop at the end. That's a good indication that our material is nice and hard. Now this is just a regular wire wheel, and I'm just going to go through and knock off some of the extra buildup that we got from the forging process and some of the bluing from the tempering. Now a note on the tempering, I did only do 400 degrees for 1 hour, and for rail spike knives that seems to be pretty decent. For higher end knives, some people will temper 2 or 3 times in a row, and but I'm not a knife smith. I'm a blacksmith. I know that's kind of sacrilegious, but I enjoy doing these. Maybe eventually I'll move on to making bigger and better knives, but as a fun project and something to sell at markets, these are great. And yeah, the finished results are usually pretty good. So anyway, video's about over. I really appreciate you guys joining me today. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Maybe you learned something, maybe you didn't. And maybe you can go out and make one now if you haven't already. There's a little before and after. Again, I really appreciate you guys, and remember to like and subscribe. Check us out on Facebook. We also have an Instagram. Links to those are on our Facebook page. Check us out at facebook.com/EP Ironworks. And if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. Thank you.